Hello, everyone. This is Mark Haskelson. I'm the president of Compliance Group. I'm excited to be doing another one of our free education series for the American Optometric Association. Thank you for joining us today. We are very excited to have you. If you are not familiar with our free education series, what is going to happen basically is both our upcoming and past webinars are available. Are they recorded and/or where you can sign up for them on our website? So if you'd like to see if there's other folks in your organization that can make use of this, or if you just want to get a copy of the webinar, please do hit up our website to get that. There's a whole bunch of other free resources, white papers, articles, cover sheets, that kind of thing. So you are welcome to do that. We always encourage and appreciate sharing information with you all. For today, for this webinar, please do ask questions. I will do my best to answer them as I am going through the webinar. If by chance I do run out of time, please do know that someone on my staff or myself will get back to you within about 24 to 48 hours. So, and by the way, for today's recording, it takes us about 24 hours to get a recording up on the website, so it'll be there sometime tomorrow or the next day, not immediately after the webinar today. If you are not familiar with how to ask questions, there should be, usually it's on the right-hand side of your screen. You can type in a question, it'll come to me, I'll read it, and I will do my best to answer it. There is no such thing as a silly question, so please don't be shy. I'm not going to read your name out, but the questions do make this a lot more interesting, so please don't be shy about it. So let's talk a little bit today. So security and compliance bootcamp. At a real high level, security and compliance are highly interrelated. A lot of people just assume that if they did a security risk assessment, you may know that term from a meaningful use perspective, that made them HIPAA compliant. It's not the way it works. And actually, it's going to be important that people in today's world, they understand that both security and compliance are critical parts of what you do and how you protect a practice. So you really do want to understand both of them and where they intersect and how you can protect you and your patients. For those of you, if you're not familiar with Compliancy Group, we are the endorsed solution by the AOA. There's a whole other bunch of folks in eye care that use us, ranging from some of the buying organizations like a PERC, organizations like Essilor, Vision Associates, you name it. We're very proud of our relationship with everybody. But do know that Compliance Group is not just eye care. We are actually endorsed by about 40 different medical associations. And if you are a user of ours, our role is to simplify compliance for you. And we are very proud that we have never, ever had a client ever fail an audit. And we are involved with 2 or 3 federal audits on any given month. We have a couple of very interesting ones, one very specific one, where it was the president of PERC. Who had a massive breach, and we were able to help him prove that he had made a good faith effort and therefore got no fines and no corrective actions. So let me keep going on kind of how we're going to educate you today. So I'm going to step you through some of the key basics, and then we'll get into more of the specifics around cybersecurity and how they intersect with compliance. So first of all, you have to keep in perspective that the government, if you get in trouble, does not come in and say, show me all of your technology. The way they will measure whether or not you have satisfied HIPAA law is based on what's called the 7 fundamental elements of an effective compliance program. The reason why I stress this when we're talking about security is you need to be doing both correctly. It's not just about did you have training or did you have encrypted email. There is a right way you need to do this based on the size and who you are and how you run your business, and that's an important element to walk away from. So we're going to talk a little about security. We're going to talk about why healthcare is such a target, how you can use security and HIPAA to improve your practice, and then ultimately I'll give you some simple tips and tricks on how to limit your liability and ultimately help protect yourself. So let's start off with what are the sources of attacks. A lot of people, they presume, their presumption of how a attack occurs is not always accurate. Okay, so the 4 main are truly somebody, they break into your office or they steal something from you. Okay, makes sense. Your laptop was stolen out of your car, etc. The second one is the old-fashioned viruses. Okay, and that was you logged in and you opened a set of windows and somehow you downloaded something and all hell is breaking loose. The third one is really when an outside organization is intentionally targeting you. They are trying very hard to actually get to your data and steal it from you. And then the last one is now a growing area, which is what's happening on social media, which means you can unfortunately open up an attack to yourself based on what you did on your phone, for example. Not, everyone thinks of computers, but your phone can be at equal risk. So now, why healthcare? Unbeknownst to you, or maybe is for some of the folks on this call, healthcare, whether we like it or not, is technically the fastest growing sector of the U.S. economy. It represents 26%, and unfortunately, it is also the highest rate of what's called ransomware attacks. 88% of ransomware attacks are targeted toward a healthcare organization, specifically the small and mid-size. You are particularly vulnerable and particularly appealing because the PHI that you store is worth about $1,500 a record. Just to give you a comparison, a stolen credit card is only worth about $200. Okay, so it is far more valuable. There's more that they can do with it. Therefore, you see a lot more attention on trying to go after it. And unfortunately, for smaller organizations, it's really hard for you to protect yourself. So, you see stuff in the news, and I think everyone presumes that ransomware is something that has to do with big companies. It really isn't, okay? Ransomware attacks can be anywhere just for a couple $100, attacking the smallest firms, or thousands attacking larger, and vice versa. Okay, often these attackers do not even know who you are. For whatever reason, they captured your email address or your domain, your URL for your website, and they've decided to target you for various different reasons. So now, because everyone on this call is eye care related, we're going to talk a little bit about what we're seeing in the eye care breaches. So there is something called the wall of shame, and what the wall of shame is all meaningful breaches are tracked by the U.S. government. By law, you have to report a meaningful breach within 60 days. So currently there are 36 meaningful breaches that are currently open, 9 of them that are under active investigation. So it can be something that happened that the government decided they're not going to investigate you, or it could be one that they have not decided whether they're going to investigate you or not. But do know that it is public record. So if your presumption, hey, I don't have to worry about this, they're not going to find me. Well, the fine may not be what gets you, but how about the fact that it'll be in your local news? Okay, or that your insurance company and bank may be using this to decide whether or not they terminate your line of credit or not. So, security. A lot of people, when they think of security, what they're thinking of is technology. Okay, and we're thinking of locks on doors. That's not particularly high technology, but in the high technology sector, you're thinking of computers and scary-looking people with hoodies. But in reality, that's not what security is about. Okay, security is about giving you the peace of mind, that you can focus on your business or your patients without being concerned about other things messing you up. Okay, now because of that, what we really want to do is help you understand that where security is amounting from. So for all the great technology, and I spent a lot of time in the technology sector, organizations that specialize in just helping protect small and mid-sized practices. But even with all that great stuff, the reality is 76% of breaches are caused by a human element of failure. Okay, so a lot of different things that cause that. Could be as simple as you lost a device. Could be as bad as so, for example, the second element here is 26% of the time it was actually the IT department that turned off a setting. Therefore, or failed to follow a set of policies and procedures which caused the error. Because what we've found, and this is CompTIA, is the international certifying body of all security techs, they're identifying that, unfortunately, the biggest threat is that most people really do believe what they have in place was good enough, and often it is not. So, to kick this off, just to keep it kind of light and interesting, I'm going to talk about I'm going to take cybersecurity, compliance, the Game of Thrones, and candy. And, usually when I do this in front of a big room, they kind of shake their heads and say, there's no way you can pull that off, but I'm going to take a shot at this. Okay, so first of all, when you think of cybersecurity, okay, most people are thinking about the 4 walls of a castle. And this is part of the Game of Thrones analogy here. Okay, the problem is what's inside the castle is people. Okay, and similar to a Tootsie Pop, it's not the hard outside center, It's the soft, gooey things inside that everyone's after. Okay, so if you think of cybersecurity as around the tech, compliance is really around the people. Okay, what is it that they are doing and what they need? Okay, and the mistakes that they can make, which ultimately, even though you thought you had a good, safe environment, for those of you who watch Game of Thrones, often even though you thought you had the security in place in the four walls, it's the inside, that soft gooey center inside, that can cause the problem. So I'm not going to do a spoiler here, but if you've not seen Game of Thrones, really, really bad things happen to this particular king in his own castle. Okay, so now the real costs of cybersecurity breaches is actually much worse than most people think. Most people think that they're, that the issue here is, well, if I'm going to get fined, how much money could they fine me? $1.5 million. That is the average rate. Okay. But there were, back in last year was one of the highest round of rates of enforcement that we've seen. It was up 400% versus the year before. But let's talk about what's below the line. So it's not whether or not, not just the fine that you got in trouble. It's what things like below the line are. For example, it'll cost you on average $250 per patient involved. Okay, and all the requirements of notifying them. Okay. Now the next thing that happens is, okay, you have to look at what are the incidental costs of, let's say in this case, a ransomware account. So, for example, data loss. Unfortunately, a lot of people, even though they paid the ransom, because most ransomware guys or companies are not, they're not necessarily some professional firm. Okay, often it's just a bunch of people, who are just playing with software and trying to see if they can make something happen. So it is pretty common that of the people who pay for ransomware, okay, that 1 in 4, even though they paid, never got their data back. Okay, or the data they did get back, they were unable to use. Okay, other things that are below the line are class action lawsuits. Your bank may cancel your line of credit. Your insurance company may cancel your line of credit. You can lose your position at hospitals. So there's a lot more what I would call the below the line costs that you have to understand, that this is not just about, no one's going to, they're not going to find me. This is about the overall, hey, how would it work in your town if your company was on the front page of the news for having children's data be stolen? Okay, chances are that's going to end kind of poorly for you. So let's talk a little bit about the things that cause this. So ransomware. Why ransomware has become such a hot topic the last couple of years is it's different than what were viruses. It used to be a virus would break into your computer and it was intentionally trying to ruin your data, okay, so that you could never get it back. Or they were viruses that were trying to steal your data so that they could use it. Ransomware is different because they're not after either of that. What they want to do is just they want to encrypt the data on your machine, and not so much that it's unusable, but only so that you have to pay them some fee to get it back. Okay. Now, what that means is often, they don't know how valuable your data is. They're just looking for $1,000. It's about the running average. Now, how do you get malware? The majority of ways you get a malware have to do with what you did. So the number one is an email attachment. Okay, you see a link in an email. You went to a website. Okay, all of these are areas where are the top areas of what is causing ransomware to open. So, some simple tips and tricks at the most basic of thing is, if you have an attachment and you don't recognize the sender, or the attachment looks odd, don't open it. Okay, some of the best training we're going to give you is just don't do it. Just if you're not familiar with it, delete it, and if the person, call the person on the phone that sent it to you. Okay. What is HIPAA? Now, it's important to get a little bit of the basic, because if you get the basics of HIPAA down, you then can see how you can use HIPAA to protect you from a security perspective. Because unfortunately, most people really don't even take their passwords that seriously. The number one password in the United States is password 123. And if we were to, there's a video, unfortunately, it does not play well on a GoToWebinar like this, where it's just walking up to people on the street and asking them, we're going to ask you about how secure your password is. And in most cases, in 3 to 5 questions, I can get you to explain what your password is to me and actually disclose it. So let's talk about the rules that exist. The privacy rule has to do with you. You are all doctors on this call, which means you are covered entities, which means there are a definitive set of rules about what you are allowed, what you are and are not allowed to do with your patients and your patients' information. Where most of you get in trouble is the security rule, okay? Because what happens is the security rule is really made up of multiple parts. Those parts break it down into the security and technical audit, which most people, the experience they have with that is they wanted to attest for meaningful use. They heard that they needed an SRA, so they hired a firm to do a security risk assessment. That is fine, except that the government also requires you to do other things. So, for example, you're required to do a physical audit. There are administrative and privacy audits that are required. And by failing to do all of the things that are required, you are unfortunately not assessing your risks correctly, step number one. But more importantly, you're going to piss off the government, because the government's going to look at you and say, you were clearly negligent. You did not take care of the things we told you to do. The last part of the rule is the omnibus rule. This is particularly important in today's world, because this is what's causing most of your vendors to be concerned about HIPAA compliance, right? And here's why. The change in the law in regards to incidences was simple. If an incident happens, you have 60 days to report a meaningful breach, and the rest you report at the end of the year. Pretty straightforward. Under the BA side, under the vendor side of the people who help you, this change in the law required that all of the vendors in healthcare also be HIPAA compliant. And that means everybody from your accountant, your lawyer, your billing company, your call center, your IT group that supports you, etc. Everyone who touches potentially or in any way could come in contact with PHI has to be HIPAA compliant. Okay? Now, only the U.S. government decides who is and is not HIPAA compliant. So what happens is your role as a covered entity or as a doctor, an OD in this case, is that you need to do two things. You need to get a legal document that says anybody who was involved, that organization, that they've signed a document that they understand that you both fall under HIPAA law and that you're responsible for your respective actions. That's really all that needs to be into a good BA agreement. In reality, if you're not getting them, you should be getting them, because they really help protect your practice. Why? Because 30% of the breaches that happen in the U.S. are caused by the vendor, not by the end client. Okay, so it was your EHR provider. There's a couple of examples I'm going to give you as we go through this of scenarios like that. So what does this often look like? One of the problems is with this, the security perspective in regards to compliant is a lot of folks, they get a security risk assessment done, okay, or maybe they put in some security remediation efforts, maybe encrypted email, and maybe they have some policies and procedures. That is awesome. Okay, you're making a step in the right direction, but unfortunately, if you're not doing the rest of this, you are neither secure nor compliant. Okay, so what you need to be doing is there's 6 audits. They are required to be done every year: administrative, privacy, and security. So, for example, if I was to turn around and say, whom on this call has everyone on this call completed their high-tech subtitle Part D privacy audit this year? If you all raised your hands and said, I have no idea what that word even means, then you are not HIPAA compliant. Okay, so all 6 audits got to be done. The next thing that has to happen is you have to identify your gaps, and you have to have a remediation plan for each one. Now, notice as I'm going through this, you don't need to use an external group to do this. You can absolutely do this yourself. There are tools, like, for example, our role with the American Optometric Association, where we're the endorsed solution, to help you with this. But bottom line, you can absolutely do it yourself. So, the gaps, the remediation efforts that are identified, you have to, a lot of people are afraid to do this because often they're like, well, once I know then my weakness, I have to fix it. No, you can show your weakness and prove that you are in the process of fixing it. Okay, that's, again, gap identification and the remediation plan. We have a scenario of a client that lost a laptop. It was unencrypted, which normally would be a very serious HIPAA infraction. But because that organization can prove that they had done all their audits every year, they've done all the things that are required, and they had many locations. In this case, they were, I think, over 30 locations, and it just took time to upgrade them all. So unfortunately, something happened during that time frame, but as long as they could prove their good faith effort, no fine, no corrective action plans. So the next thing you have to have is policies, procedures, and training. Now, there's administrative, privacy, and security policies. They're different. You need to have all three types. The other thing you need to have in order to prove you're compliant is you need to have training. So you need training, things like obviously general HIPAA training, fraud, waste, and abuse training. There's some good security training, or if you're taking credit cards, PCI training you need to have. All are around to help you, your people to understand what they should and should not do. So, for example, some of those links that we talked about, if you get an email and they, let's say it's your EHR company saying, "Oh, please click on this link to reset your password." Why did you get that, right? Because if it was, if you ordered it, that makes sense. But if you didn't order it and suddenly you saw a link like that, I'd be concerned. The next thing that happens is you really want to make sure you have all your documentation, and you want to make sure all you and your employees all have, on an annual basis, confirm that you understand the policies and procedures and you're going to follow them. Okay. Next thing you need to do is you need to have any vendor you're working with. You need to have a BAA agreement, and you need to have the technical due diligence. It's some sort of proof that you looked at them and you asked them to make sure that they could protect your privacy. You are not responsible for their compliance. Okay, you are responsible for making sure that they have enough security in place to protect the PHI or the protected health information you're going to share. Okay. Last thing is incident management. If something goes wrong, hopefully it doesn't, but when it does, you want to make sure you have a process to investigate it. Okay, so now, what is, unfortunately with ransomware, which is primarily aimed at the small and mid-sized organizations, one of the tough things is, if you look at this chart, what it's showing you is that 93% of the people who had a ransomware attack had antivirus and anti-malware software in place. Okay? 77 had email and spam filters. What the point that they're showing is the only people who really were well protected against ransomware were the folks that had cybersecurity training, and this falls under HIPAA. Okay, this is why HIPAA and compliance or cybersecurity often work really well together. Okay, now if you remember the Hawaii emergency broadcast where the whole island was told that, or all the islands were told that there was an emergency and they needed to evacuate, nuclear bombs pending. Now, what's funny here is if you look carefully at the computer screens, so this guy is actually one of the guys that was responsible for managing that alert system. And if you were to take a close look at his screens, you would see that he actually has the password to the emergency broadcast system on his monitor. Now, the picture he took was, I think, an Instagram picture. He was just showing off his office. He just did not realize that he actually had the passwords on the screens behind him. And this is a security expert here, folks. This is one of your IT people. You would think that they would know better than that. Okay, so there are a couple of things you can do to lower the risk, because you cannot truly protecting yourself from a breach from occurring. It's why you have car insurance, right? You're going to drive safely, but unfortunately, something can happen to you or your car. It could be in a parking lot and somebody hits it. So you want to have proper insurance. Some of the best insurance you can have are really a combination of three things: backup and disaster recovery, encrypted of your data, and the training of your people. If you do those three things, you're really addressing you're lowering your risk. You're also satisfying HIPAA, for that matter, by a pretty big percentage, 94% in this case. So this is a recent breach that occurred actually in the last, it was originally from the end of last year, but the fine was just loaded. So in this case, this is a great example of the 30% of the time where it was the vendor who caused the problem. Okay. In this case, the business associate, this was a transcription company, they hired a software firm to set up their website. They hired a firm to make sure that their website was set up correctly. Okay. Unfortunately, in doing that, they had left open made a page on the website that it was not hidden. Okay. What I mean by hidden is you didn't need a password or to get to it. So what happened was there were whole parts of people's PHI, protected health information, or patient data, that was all someone had to do was Google it. And they would get right to the page and they'd be able to see all that information. Okay, so it's pretty darn important that you make sure that you protect, for these type of situations. Okay. Now, oddly enough, this particular person was barred. I talked about, let's say, above the line, below the line fines. In this particular case, this company is barred from doing business in New Jersey. Okay, because the state attorney general felt that they were so negligent in the way they ran their business that they said you are no longer allowed to have a business license in the United States. Okay, so for those of you as a doctor, could you imagine if they told you that you were no longer allowed to practice medicine at all? And that has happened before, by the way. Hopefully, it never happens to you or somebody that you know. Okay, so a couple other more examples where people thought that security protected them. But unfortunately doesn't. So things like a lost laptop. I told you the one where one of our clients lost a laptop, not a problem. But let me explain why Oregon Health and Sciences had a similar scenario, but on that case, they were fined $2.7 million. Now, here's why. You were supposed to do those 6 audits every year. You're supposed to keep that information going back 6 years. In the case of Oregon, when they had this lost laptop, they were very quick to respond saying, look, we have done a security risk assessment every year going back 6 years. We have a HIPAA compliant hosting service, and we thought we did pretty good. We do training, etc. The reason why they were fined 2.7 was they were considered negligent, and the reason being was they had never done an administrative audit. So they were totally unaware that in many cases their people took their equipment home with them. And in this particular case, not only did they take it home, but they took the equipment on vacation, and that the actual laptop was stolen out of a child's hands while watching like Netflix by a pool. Okay, and that's why they were considered negligent. From a malware perspective, Alaskan Behavioral Health Group, small company, small organization, about 30 employees. They were fined a low amount because they were a nonprofit. But this is one of my favorite stories to tell people who think that what they have is good enough. They did a security risk assessment by their IT group. They had a formal training class that was done by an external company, right? And then the last thing they had was they had also had policies and procedures they had purchased. Why were they fined $150,000 for their malware? Well, because the government said, look, you didn't do your other audits. You just did the security risk assessment, so strike one. Those policies and procedures you bought, fantastic, except you bought what we call store-bought. Right? They were not in any way customized to reflect the way that this organization ran their practice. So the government's attitude was, listen, you just because you bought a set of policies and procedures, but they sat on a shelf unopened, that didn't help your employees know what way to do things. And then lastly, on the training, they did have a formal third party do the training, which was fine. The problem is, remember that 7 fundamental elements thing I told you, effective training? The problem the government had is, you had 30% turnover, which means that a third of your people were not there for that training. Okay, and it was a year or more later before the next training. So that was why they were considered negligent and like I said, as a nonprofit, they got a smaller fine. Lost smart devices. This one is kind of interesting. For those of you who are convinced that I'm going to outsource my security to a company and they're going to protect me, this was actually an IT firm. The tech came out, was doing some work. For whatever reason, chose to send an email to his phone to test something. He later lost the phone. It was not encrypted. So the IT group was fined $650,000 for failing to have proper risk assessments, proper policy and procedures, and proper training. You're going to find that over and over and over again. Okay, really important on the security perspective. All right, now I'm going to try to give you some. Here's the point where if you hopefully I wasn't boring you too much, where I'm going to give you some tips and tricks on the way to think about cybersecurity and your practice. Okay, so if you think of your practice is like your home, before you leave for the day, you might lock the door. Okay, this way think of that as that's your perimeter protection. Okay, that's your house. Right now, the way you do that from a cybersecurity perspective, if you do risk assessments, you might make sure you have the right firewalls and that your people are properly trained. Okay. Now, once you've done that, that's fantastic. So you've locked the door. Hopefully that is keeps people out. But the problem is, if someone does truly break in, okay, now you need cameras, right? Because of your alarm system. That's to detect that an occurrence has occurred, right? Because if someone broke into your home, if you never knew about it and you didn't come home for a day or for a week, a lot of really bad things can happen, right? Versus if you knew about it, you had an alarm or you had cameras that told you something happened, maybe one of the new fancy Ring things, then you would know, like, okay, great, I need to go home and start fixing this, right? Or maybe it's a deterrent. They see the cameras, they see the alarm system, buzz goes off, they leave you alone. So in the case of cybersecurity, that's the equivalent of having monitoring and auditing, spam filters, virus protection. Most importantly, I would say, is good policies and procedures that your staff know and understand. By the way, although this particular webinar is not about this, there is another session I do on how being HIPAA compliant and secure actually improves not only your employee satisfaction, but your patient loyalty. You will retain more patients if you do this correctly. Okay, so now something bad's happened. You found out about it. Now, how do you get your stuff back? So if you kept a bat at the door, you could chase the person who was trying to run away with your TV, and hopefully they would drop it, because they think you're going to hit them, and therefore you got your TV back. Okay, now, but from a security perspective, the way you want to look at that is encryption, storage and backup, and recovery plans. Okay, and why this is so important, I'll talk more details about this, is if you had all of your data encrypted and backed up correctly, then if you had a virus, malware, or somebody stole all of your stuff, it really wouldn't matter. Why? Because you would have had a backup of it, okay, which means you could recover it. Your patients wouldn't be, suffer. And then two, if you encrypted correctly, the person who stole it would not be able to use it. Okay, so that's why you really want to have it. Now, one of the things I'm going to recommend is, as you do these things, practice these things every once in a while. I have a lot of practices I talk to where they're like, oh, yeah, we got a backup and we got all that stuff in place. I'm like, awesome. So do me a favor. I'm going to go flick off the lights. What are you going to do? Prove to me that you can recover your practice if I truly took your computer away. Okay, and think of malware or lost or stolen equipment. So the idea of encryption and backup is incredibly important in healthcare. Okay, because that PHI, as we were saying, so the idea of encrypting it is the data is now secure, that even if someone stole it, they can't use it. Why, to you as a medical practice, does that matter? If you had proper encryption in place, then even if they stole everything in your office, it's not a HIPAA violation. You don't have to report it. Okay, because even if they stole the data, they cannot use it. It was encrypted. They've stolen something that is useless. Okay, in what is your backing up of encrypted data, you should practice what's called 3-2-1 rules. I'll show that in a minute. Okay, you should, if you're doing backing up, make sure that part of 3-2-1 is having that make sure one of your devices is disconnected, right? So one, it can't get corrupted again, right? Because you may have gotten a virus, and if you back up every morning at 10 o'clock, guess what? Yesterday's backup from 10 is still secure, but if you backed it up with today that got the virus, your backup is now corrupted. Okay, you definitely want to test these things on a regular basis. Okay, you want to make sure that pretend that the system went down, and how could you recover the business? So the 3-2-1 rule is a pretty straightforward concept, and right is that you should have 3 copies of your data. It should be in 2 different formats, and it should one of them should always be offsite. Okay, so 3 different copies. It's kind of straightforward. 2 different formats. One can be a hard drive that's plugged into your computer or at your office. The other can be a web-based application, like you think of, let's say, a Dropbox. Okay. The reason why one of them has to be offsite is if the building burned down and your only backup was the one that's sitting on your desk or underneath your desk, then that defeats the purpose, right? You can't recover. So some people have 2 different hard drives, and once a week, once a month, whatever, they swap them out and just keep the other one, off-site somewhere so that they can recover. Okay, and by the way, many of these things, one of the things I want to stress, although this can become very sophisticated, a lot of this you can do very common sense, right? So, for those of you who have a Mac, you can program a Mac to back up to an external drive. It takes 2 seconds. You can encrypt your entire hard drive. PCs have the same capacity, but you really need to be on the latest version of Windows to do that. So older versions of Windows do not do it. The latest versions do. Okay. All right. So let's give you some more tips and tricks. What can you do right now? Well, um, uh, not because we are a compliance firm here, but because being HIPAA compliant, as you saw, just the basis of the law mandated 94% of what is the protections about being secure. Okay, so if you don't understand, you don't want to be all techie, just understand the most basics of this 20-year-old rule, which is HIPAA law. If you are doing it correctly across all the different parts, and please do not fall prey for folks. We've seen a lot of organizations that are coming to you guys and saying, "Oh, just do a security risk assessment. You don't have to worry about the rest." Hopefully, what you saw by the real-world examples. If that's all you do, you are not HIPAA compliant. You can do the rest yourself if you have other ways of doing it. But if you are just relying on a quick checklist-based tool that you did online in 20 minutes or a half hour, unfortunately, I think you will find that that is not going to help you pass an audit. And ask for them to give you proof. That's a great way to do it. Okay, so passwords. Here's another quick, simple trick. Passwords, everyone presumed that it had to be some crazy foreign language. Your best bet on a password is to do a phrase, okay? And a phrase that only you would know, okay? Why is a phrase better? Because it's a lot easier than trying to remember exclamation points and wingdings and other pounds and stars. So, pick a sentence that means something to you. I love blue cows, okay? You might remember that pretty easily. It's kind of easy to type. But really hard. Every extra digit makes it harder and harder for someone to hack your password. Okay, show your staff members what to look for. Okay, understand what is dangerous. Links. If you get a link from, I was at Seco, and one of our clients was saying, he was talking about he had a text from his wife, and he was a gentleman probably in his 50s or 60s. But the text from his wife was something like, "Hey, babe, check this out. Thought you'd think it was cool." Okay? And it was clearly not the language him and his wife spoke to each other on. Okay? And it was a malware link. If he had clicked on it, he would have exposed himself to malware. Okay, another big one we see is, I know you have your office may be smaller, right? But having everybody have complete administrative access to all your computers and your EHR is really bad business. Okay, I understand it might be a little bit of a pain that you might have to help, type in a password every once in a while, but there is no reason why the person at the front desk needs to have the absolute latest version of iTunes every day. Okay, now if you did not give them complete access privileges, many of the viruses cannot be loaded unless you have administrative privileges on the computer. Okay. The other one we see, which is a really, really bad one in a lot of doctors' offices, is we all use the same password. Okay. And that password is the administrative password to the EHR. Okay? That means if someone wants to do something bad, they have complete access to your system to do so. Okay. Keep your anti-malware and antivirus up to date. Most of you are getting this probably for free from whoever's your internet provider. If you do see settings to turn it off, please do not. You really do want to have that in place. Now you can allow, sometimes it can be a little too over restrictive. There's ways to use it to make it so that it understands what's the websites you go to all the time versus the websites you never go to. Now, updates and extensions on your computer. When your computer says it needs to update its software, and although they'll say something innocuous like, fix bugs, right? What they're really saying is, we know we had a vulnerability and we figured out how to fix it, but if you don't put that patch in, that update, unfortunately your computer is not going to be ready to protect itself against that virus. All right, so that's why it's so important to make those things. The last thing is, have a backup plan. Practice it. Now, by the way, one of the backup plans can be not particularly sophisticated. Do you have a bunch of clipboards and manila folders in the back that if you had to work with a patient without internet, could you do so? Okay. So, reiterating, you really need to be making sure, like I said, if you are doing it yourself, okay, or you are using a third party to just do specific security risk assessments, there's nothing wrong with that. Just do make sure that you are addressing the rest of what the law requires. Okay, things like incident management, business associate management, employees attestations, they are not optional. They are required under a federal law. Not doing it gets a lot of people in fines and a lot of trouble. So it's not the, as we stress, it's not the couple of dollars in fines that you're worried about. It's what the 10 times that in penalties or other lawsuits, loss of other services, being out of business for a period of time that are really what's going to get you. Okay, so we as we are the endorsed solution for the American Optometric Association, as well as a whole bunch of different folks in the eye care space. What we do is, if you are interested in having this problem go away, if you're looking for a coach that will help you through this entire process, we are offering 3 months free. So if you sign up with us from this webinar, you will get the 13th, 14th, and 15th months free. If you are not familiar with Compliancy Group, all those big circles you saw and all the things you need to have, basically we make all those things go away. Okay, so now I am at the end of the speaking portion of this. So if you have questions that you would like to send over to me, you can type them in the box. There's a couple there that I'll start addressing. If you don't remember, on the right-hand side, you can type a question in. So biggest one that we see, and we see this a lot, there's a couple different people have asked about it, is you mentioned business. The question is, what do I do if my business associate does not sign a BA agreement? My recommendation, if that happens, is to go find another vendor. Why? Because that vendor, clearly they do not understand the importance of the law and protecting your firm. So I think you should go find somebody else to solve it for you. Okay? There are, whether you are a client of Compliancy groups or not, we have a listing of thousands of HIPAA compliant vendors that would love to work with you. You are welcome to ping us. Okay. Can I use can I use the firewall that came with my modem? You can. Okay. I would say the basics that you get from people, from your either the modem or the router you got from your provider. Not a bad thing, but understand, the thing that is usually problematic is most people leave the password as admin, 123. Okay, so just be aware it's not horrible that you are using a non-commercial application. It's just really important that you set it up correctly. Otherwise, if you leave it as admin 123, anybody can log in and lock you out and access all of your information. Right, so it's important that you make sure it's done. Okay. Okay. What needs to happen when employees will not quit using their phones? All right, that sounds a little bit more like an HR issue, but I will weigh in on that one. Okay. So, considering your phone may have access to sensitive information, you have every right to require your employees to have some restrictions on their phones. Okay. Now, this is assuming that they're accessing your EHR on your behalf. And for example, if you're using an external IT company, or you do this through, if you're using the pay-for version of Gmail, you can actually restrict what people can do. Okay, like I said, it's if it is their personal device, you should be respectful. It's their personal device. What they do on their time, they should be allowed to do. But during the business day, you are paying them, which means you can control that. If you really want to be clever, there are some things you can do. Like, so for example, you can, and this is usually more common if you have a more advanced IT group, you can actually restrict it so that the people's phones are getting much slower internet speed. And that may slow them down from doing some of the things they do. Unfortunately, the general concept of an employee not doing their job, I think, is far more of a compliance issue. Now, another way we can kind of help with that is every one of your employees every year should be agreeing to your employee conduct manual, your use and disclosure data, etc., your policies, procedures. And in my case, it says you are allowed to use your phone, but only for emergencies. During the day, you are supposed to be working, and that if it was an emergency, you should have stepped out and gone home, not been sitting there texting. Good question, though. All right, folks. If you don't have any other questions, I really appreciate you joining us today. And we are offering the 3 months free. So if you'd like more information about how we can help you. Oh, another really good thing to use. If you look up on the site now, the free security and compliance checklist, that is a tool that you can go to our website. We may even have a link on the AOA Excel site to get to it. But what it is it's a simple 10 question questionnaire that asks you the simple things you need to know. Now, here's what happens. If you can answer these questions, and they're not meant to be high tech or anything, then you're in good shape. But if you find that you're looking at the questions and as you're reading them, you either do not understand what the question is or you're not doing it, like, for example, the 6 audits required every year, or business associate management, incident management. If you know you're not doing that, then you're not HIPAA compliant. But please do download it. And if you have any questions, my team and I, we are more than welcome to answer them. Do know that you do not need to be a client of ours to ask us a question. We actually have an Ask the Auditor function we have available for the AOA Excel members. We think it's a great organization. There's some great buying advantages through them, some better services that you can get through the AOA. So we highly recommend you start working with them. Okay. Once again, everybody, thank you so much for spending a few minutes with me today. I hope this was helpful, and look forward to meeting you at the next event. For those who are reviewing any that were at SECO last week, or coming up on the events that are going to be coming up over the next couple of months, look forward to seeing you all. Have a great day. Bye-bye.